Michael with United Veterans Worldwide, excited today to meet with Ricky Savage. He and I got in contact probably 2 months ago through a common friend of ours who wrote a book that really inspired me. And here's his book today. And since it's going to appear backwards on here, I'll read it to you. How to Get Your Resisting Loved One into Treatment. Dr. Brian, how do you say his name? Liswanwan?
Yeah, that's close. That's about as close as us gringos are going to get to that.
Yeah, and I just call him Dr. Brian. Dr. Brian.
Yeah,
and I think in terms of jiu-jitsu, I think he's ranked number 3 right now. And Ricky here is ranked number 1, and I'll have him tell a little bit about himself, but I'm super excited to hear Ricky's journey, and glad that he can join us today. Ricky, tell us about yourself.
Well, my name is Ricky Savage. Quick resume. So spent 25 years in the Marine Corps, joined right out of high school, 1990 to 2015. Had a great career. I was able to do 17 years on the enlisted side, then switch over to being an officer. I was a warrant officer for 8. And then once I became a maintenance officer, I was also with the V-22 Osprey program. So I was a flyer as well. So I had an opportunity to see, well, essentially the entire Marine Corps in terms of how we are a combined arms entity, but then also from like the most junior guy in the room to one of the fairly senior guys. So I really had a great run in the course. So it was awesome. And then got out in 15, took a little bit of time off, but worked in aerospace for about 4 years as a contractor back with the V-22 program. And then around 2020, the program is modifying. Also, COVID hit, so I was like, I'm gonna take a little bit of a hiatus because I at that point too, I was kind of done with government contracting just because I wanted to get into a different part of aerospace. I'd never worked in like corporate things like that. But then COVID hit, and I also had really gotten bit by the jiu-jitsu bug in early 2020. So what turned out to be what I was going to be a short hiatus has turned into a 5-year. I just had my 5-year anniversary in jiu-jitsu of what I call like my warrior monk journey, because I've been training and competing the whole time, but did some other things, finished another undergrads or whatever else. But so anyway, so it's from 2020 to currently really just been on, well, you could call it a self-discovery journey, especially as of late with a couple of ayahuasca experiences, but we can get to that a little bit later. But
yeah, I'd love to hear that.
Long and short of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. So in honor of you today, I wore my Semper Fi shirt, which is the Semper Fi team. Team Semper Fi is one of the organizations that I've participated with. It's really helped me to connect with other veterans through activities and fun runs too. But anyway, what year did you go into the Corps?
So I went from 1990 and then I retired in 2015. So July of 1990 to essentially September 2015. So 25 years in 1 month.
Yeah. Well, you and I both retired the same year. I retired in 2015 as well from the Army.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How did you find your transition out? I didn't find too many like hurdles or whatever else, but it was definitely, you realize you were institutionalized and now you're not or whatever. Yeah,
no, I was just talking to somebody on the phone today who was an Army, a female who was in the Army, and she and I talked about transition. My transition was really smooth. I was working at JFK Center at Fort Bragg, and one day was Army, the next day I was Amazon, and I was working in a huge 1.3 million square foot robotic fulfillment center, and I had 600 people that I was in charge of. What was the hardest part was the transition from having a purpose of like, I was in civil affairs, so it was a lot of focus on the humanitarian side in East Africa, to now being worried about people getting their packages that's for stuff that they're not even going to look at in 24 months.
Yeah, mission and focus can be a little different.
It was a big hit. One day I just like stood in that facility and said, "What am I doing? How am I contributing to humanity?"
Right.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons I started this YouTube channel, to try to reach guys and help them out. But Ricky, this is about you, and I'm excited to hear more of your story. Take me back in time a little bit and walk me through your military experiences, both enlisted and then as a warrant. Warrant's the best place to be if anybody's listening to, by the way. The warrants that I worked with lived the best life. They really were. They were the subject matter experts for one, and as an officer, I highly respected them, and as an enlisted, we revered them. So it was a great place to be.
Yeah, I felt the same way as I came up through the ranks. I worked for some really fantastic, officers in general. I grew up when I was a enlisted guy. I started at F-18, but I worked in F-18, so I was a jet mechanic. So I was around, like superstar guys, and and it's like the real deal Captain Americans, people that were driven their entire lives, or D1 athletes that go to the Naval Academy, great guys, great family, you're like, wow. Sorry, we went off track for a second. What were we just talking about?
Yeah, so if I go back in time and I talk through your military experiences, can you give me your highs and your lows that you experienced?
Yeah, sorry, I got all, because I never think about working on jets anymore. Sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway, no. So it was an interesting part because I got to be around like stellar individuals and a lot of good staff and COs as well. But I remember seeing that early on. One of them, it's like Sergeant Warrant Officers. So you have the jet pilots themselves, and then you have the actual warrant officers that are maintenance officers or ordnance officers, things like that. So I got to work for a couple stellar, really, maintenance officers, and that was what I aspired to be after I became like an E6 and E7.
Yeah.
So that was my experience, and then once I became one, I really understood that it was like, well, you earn it, yes, but now you have to rate it. Like you really want to. I was taught very early on that you want to earn your warrant officer rank every day because, like you just said, they're revered in a lot of ways. I mean, and it's justified because you are a subject matter expert in the Marine Corps. You have to be enlisted for a number of years before you can even apply for it. So, but at the same time, you can easily also take it the other way and be like, oh, well, I know everything. Mm-hmm. You have to ask me. Fortunately, we run into those folks too. But I was taught very early on by just example, and then also when I became a chief warrant officer, it was like, hey, you got to earn that every day. So it was amazing. And then I had a great time as an enlisted guy. I was able to essentially spent 17 years enlisted, but I spent 4 years almost at every rank. 4 years as a sergeant, staff sergeant, and gunnery sergeant, and I really appreciate. Kind of got a little long at each one of them, but I really appreciate that because I was able to be in the different types of leadership opportunities that we have in squadrons. I served in those different billets, and I also had enough time. I know now to when I went to the next rank, I was already prepared for it. Plus the professional schools that the military sends you through for E5, E6, so all of that stuff. So by the time that I was selected to be a warrant officer, I definitely didn't feel like, hey, I'm going to knock this out of the park from day one. Nothing like that. But I felt like I was very, very well prepared. I'd already finished my first undergrad. I'd already done a bunch of different type of billets that would prepare me for the type of job. Because not only being a warrant officer, but you're going back to a squadron to manage the entire maintenance load and support an operational schedule. If you can't phone that in. That's what I'm trying to say. So that being said, and so I went through warrant officer 2008. I went to Quantico, Virginia, the warrant officer basic course. One of the cool things about the Marine Corps is all officers are trained the same. We all have to go to Quantico, whether you're 22-year-old lieutenant or a 36-year-old warrant officer like I was. We go to the same school. It's called TBS, the basic school, and there's some slight differences. Theirs is 6 months, ours is 4, but there's things that we already come with. Like, for example, we're already qualified with our rifle and pistol and swim qual. That takes a good 6 weeks for the lieutenants to get through. So, but everything else is pretty much the same. And so, of course, that's physically designed for the 22-year-olds, a little challenging for us older people, which it's made to be like that, too, because, as we all know, it's mind over matter. With the exception of a few, injuries that happen a little bit, you got to go to that school prepared, and you got to keep yourself in shape or whatnot. So I thought TBS was great because everybody's the same, like no matter what, you've got to earn. So essentially, you have to earn your Marine Corps rank, and then when you get back to the fleet, you have to keep earning your not only just your rank but your billet, so to speak, especially in a maintenance department, because if there's other people that are involved, but if the maintenance officer and other key figures, whatever else. But if this person, I don't want to put so much emphasis on my job that it was like, it was all me. It's nothing. It's not like that because you have a lot of competent individuals around. But you are, as what they call a maintenance material control officer, MMCO, especially in the units like I was when I was on a MU, a Marine Expeditionary Unit, where we slammed a bunch of different airplanes together. We're on a ship. the decisions that you make are going to make a difference. And if you're not good at planning or foreseeing or reacting to adverse situations, realizing that that's pretty much every day, you can get yourself behind power curve pretty quickly. So I guess my point is like you have to not only show up every day, but then earn that by being there like at 5 o'clock in the morning to understand exactly what the requirements of that day are, down to not only each specific aircraft, but each individual work center, because maybe there's a major project going on with just normal operations that has to happen. So there's, no pun intended, several moving parts.
Yeah.
So you got to earn it, man.
Yeah. So take me back and talk to some of your ups and your downs of being in the military.
Oh, okay. So ayahuasca really helped me with this, but one of the biggest problems I really had was coming out of high school. I think whoever joins the military, maybe they're looking for something. I certainly was, validation, whatever else. So I learned very quickly that, once got a little discipline beat into me a bit. It's like, as long as you work hard and show up, you'll do well. And that's kind of the sinful life. But in the military, that's how a meritocracy works. Don't be somebody else's problem. Try to be skilled. And then obviously I was in a job that required a little bit more. You have to learn. Like you get to a squadron after you go through, say, like, I don't know, I think I went through like 7 or 8 months of training with a couple of different schools, but you're still the new guy when you get there. And you maybe you were a motorhead in high school. I wasn't per se. So when I got there, it was still at F-18. I'm like,
yeah.
So you have to learn. But, I worked hard and I had some really good, people teaching me. So I would say within a couple years, I was very proficient on that airplane, and then went on to be. The problem is I didn't really learn how to be confident without being arrogant until way later in life. Jiu-jitsu really helped me with that.
Teaches you humility really quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish that I could have, because I remember going back to those jet guys that I'll float with it. The jet guys, they were amazing because you talk about supreme confidence. They're single seat jets. They're fighting they're doing a very dangerous job. Super cool. But I remember them being able to debrief and be on each other without getting mad. I'm like, how can you argue with somebody not like that type of immature stuff I must give? But I really just, I wanted to emulate that type of confidence without arrogance. And it just, that one was hard for me to separate, it took a bit. So that's what I'm trying to say is all of the downs that I had, either, maybe drank a little bit too much every once in a while, but got kicked out of Top Gun, but that's a whole different story. Almost stopped my career at that point, 1995. Wouldn't recommend it. I got a page 11. I still to this day, kind of funny, I am Biddle. This day I have a page 11, which is for everybody that different militaries obviously have, Article 15, but I almost went to that level. But page 11 straight up says, got drunk, got a physical, a fight with another Marine, blah, blah, blah. And I don't wear that. I used to kind of be like, especially when I was a warrant officer, I'm like, hey, like a badge of honor. I do not wear that as a badge of honor because that could have went so horrible. But anyway, my point being is other than, maybe drinking to excess every once in a while, arrogance was the biggest thing that brought me down. So it would be like, super successful, working hard or whatever else. And there was times that was, what I'm trying to get at is the lows that I had in the Marine Corps or as a younger guy or whatnot, I pretty much brought them all on myself is what I've learned as of late. I'm not saying that, critical, situational factors and whatever else, love life, deploy, whatever else. But it's like, I remember just, if I would have been a little bit more mature, a little bit more faith-based, probably like that type. If I'd have learned some things earlier in life, and I don't blame anybody for not teaching me, but maybe mentored a little bit better in life, that's on me. I would have, the lows that I experienced, I probably wouldn't have had. But for the most part, other than getting kicked out of Top Gun, I never really threatened my career. I can tell you this, even though I did like to party quite a bit, I never drank and drove. It terrified me for some reason. Meaning, not for some reason. Like at the barracks, we could drink too much, whatever else, and whatever else. But that was, so I remember learning very early on, you can be a wild man, but there are boundaries. Like, don't drink and drive. Don't be a DV guy. I was only married for a short. So my point being is there's just certain things you don't do. And then if you're really good at your job, you pretty much can do whatever else you want. And that got me in a little bit of trouble from time to time because that arrogance would pop back up. Mm-hmm. So, but no, I look back at my military career and I really have, like I had, once again, a lot of good mentors. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. So even though at the time I was like, was in a training squadron, for example, for 4.5 years, and it was horrible, man. Because 50 airplanes, anybody that's watching this, that it was in naval aviation, Marine Corps, or Navy aviation, especially in the 80s and 90s, that worked in a RAG or training squadron, that is indentured servitude, man. I don't know how else to put it. You could never get away nowadays with the hours we work. This is no kidding. Like, our night crew would come in at 3 o'clock, and if we didn't see day crew the next day, it was a good night. Nowadays, there's no way, but but 4.5 years we did the BRAC move from El Toro, which was in Orange County, down to San Diego. My buddies were deploying. This is before the war.
Yeah,
I was miserable. But I will say this: if I wouldn't have spent so much time there, I wouldn't have become the next level mechanic that I had to become. Because you're working on 50 airplanes, they're all beat up. Students are wrecking them. They're old. They're whatever. I took that all that BS I had to deal with, and the stress and whatever else, but also the mechanical durability. And I took that in, to later squadrons and absolutely into my warrant officer career. So I attribute that amount of sacrifice or just struggle to what made me into being, because I was fairly successful as a warrant officer. I won a pretty decent award from the Marine Corps Aviation Association when we came off that MEU. Once again, they have to pick one individual. It's like being the right guard on a Patriots Super Bowl team, right? You know what I'm saying? But they got to pick one person. So I remember very specifically being, going to the thing that Commandant Marine Corps gives you the award and whatnot. And so my ability to get to accomplish what I accomplished, besides having just a stellar team around me, was having to just die in that squadron in the 90s, man. I hated it. I will say this: if I was a suicidal person, I certainly would have contemplated it back then.
Yeah,
it was that bad, but it made me very durable later on.
Well, to speak to the arrogance piece, when I first went into the military, I came in the Navy as a corpsman. And soon after graduating Corps School, I headed off to Camp Pendleton and started training with the Marines. When a big storm hit, they would get on the roof, get their bed sheets, and some of those guys were so confident they could parachute off the building, the 3-story building, and break their freaking legs. And I was like, what is this? And then I would get out to the field with them, and we were in foxholes, digging foxholes, and charging machine gun nests and all the other training we were going through. And what I started to see was that those guys were fearless. The training that the Marine Corps gave them at that time, pre-war, was that they were invincible, that they were the strongest military unit to go against the enemy. And you could close with the enemy and defeat them really quickly. And that arrogance, to me, gave me great confidence as a corpsman. I was like, shoot, I'm in good hands with these guys. They get hurt, I'm going to be there on the spot with them. And if we're ever in conflict, these guys are going to do it. So I think that was one mindset that the Marine Corps offered that is so essential. And it became essential because eventually when the Marines eventually deployed to Iraq, and you talk about Fallujah or other places, I mean, we're talking about the heaviest of the fighting in a lot of ways. And my hat's off and great respect. And I'm so glad that you guys had that arrogance to say, if the enemy's there, we'll take it,
Well, first of all, I appreciate that. On behalf of all Marines, thank you. Especially my buddies that were chewing dirt in Fallujah and Ramadi. My entire combat experience. I mean, I ended up doing 10 deployments, 5 combat tours, and the reason I say that is because mine was an air war. So the first couple of times I was over there, I was with the wing staff. My last 3, I was as an operator flyer, so to speak. So not so to speak, I was an actual combat air crew guy in flying missions, which completely changed my perspective in terms of what's going on in the battle space, and also understanding being able to when you're in the air and you're actually a combatant and you're hearing what's going on in the nets, you're actually involved with inserts or extracts, or you got on the fire's net to make sure you're not flying under something as
deconflicting is a huge factor, right?
Yeah. The cool part about that was I didn't so it was I didn't get to do any of that or do that until the end of my career. So I was a little older and whatnot, which was a little bit challenged as an air crew guy. Physically a little bit, but more just the older we get, the more we start thinking about our mortality.
Yeah.
So I consider myself very competent air crew because I was trained by people and they didn't, they knew. Should step back for a second. Warrant officers typically, when they get to a squadron as a maintenance officer, they're so busy doing other stuff they don't have a chance. And all my fellow peers but some of them, you're not supposed to fly, is what I'm trying to say. However, it was in the mid to late 2000s when the Osprey was still it was already past development. We were getting ready to deploy it from the East Coast. So I was in one of the first squadrons that took it to Iraq, and then we took it on the MEU, and then went kinetic from the MEU. So we were doing a bunch of stuff. We needed flyers. And so I was with the Osprey program for going on 8 years. So I just ended up doing the syllabus, becoming winged. And at one point, when I went to my last squadron, it's funny, 2013 was my last deployment. I was actually getting ready to retire, and then I shifted to a unit that was just standing up. So my old squadron was getting ready to deploy. So I switched it with my buddy. So these guys, then ISIS popped up, and so everybody had to rapid deploy. The MEU deploys as normal. I'm with the new one, VMM 363, which is a new stand-up squadron. We went from like initial operation capable to full operation capable in 4 months. Because we were going to rapid deploy. Now everybody was safe and everything else. I don't want to make everybody, but it was done. We were moving quick when we deployed, and I'm so proud of these guys. 82% of the squadron had never deployed because though we had been at war forever, everybody got out.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And then I think let me get this numbers right. About six of us flyers between pilots and crew chiefs and guys and whatnot had ever deployed the airplane to combat it ever. So it was very, very small, but everybody else really stepped up. And even though it was a new deployment for everybody else, but no, that was the. I keep going transient. What were we talking about right before I got on that?
Yeah, so we were just talking about your experience. So when you mentioned that you deployed so many times, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I haven't thought about a lot of this stuff. The people listening to this will be like, dude, he's losing his mind. It's funny. I've really focused so much on lately as project management, which is my new career.
Yeah.
And jiu-jitsu. I haven't thought about all these other. These memories pop up when I started floating away. But no, what I want to say is I'm so proud of that squadron because it was my last deployment. I wasn't even supposed to go. I extended to go because anybody would, whatever. And I ended up going. And what was cool about it is they ended up winning Squadron of the Year from that same Marine Corps Aviation Association for that deployment.
Wow.
So it was cool. I mean, I had a really fun and good career, man, and I work with a lot of good people. I have nothing but good things to say about it. Even the people maybe that I used to have beef with because I was arrogant or whatever else, and maybe this is a little bit mature or whatever else, but now I can totally see like the entire perspective of everything and how I think people use the word blessed a little bit too much, but I was really lucky with what I got to do in my career. You know?
Were you fixed wing or?
Huh?
Were you fixed wing?
I was fixed wing. When I was an enlisted guy, and then when I went over to being a warrant officer, I spent, with the exception of when you first become a warrant officer, especially on the aviation side, you'll work at like a higher headquarters for like a year. I deployed with those guys, but other than that, I spent the entire time with deployable Osprey squadrons in one fashion or another. Either like a MEU that I went out with on the East Coast. Oh, that's what I meant to say was the East Coast. In the Marine Corps, probably other entities too, but when they introduce a whole new platform, they usually pick one side to do it on because the whole Marine Corps kind of pain in the ass.
Yep.
So they stood up the entire Osprey on the East Coast. The West Coast was still flying the CH-46. I went out to the West Coast to help them stand up a couple squadrons and then decided to retire. So so I ended up spending all of my time because of that like transition out. I'm sorry. The transition to the West Coast to stand people up, and then my retirement like plan, even though I ended up deploying post like what I was as I was retiring because of that. So I got really lucky with that. I don't want to say I was selected for CW4. I would have been per se because I was in zone for it or whatnot. It's like the next up.
Yep.
But instead of burning the promotion, you like submit a letter or so whatnot. So I would have pinned on 4 the month I got out. So I ended up spending my entire time. Other than very few, like a year at the first part of it, operational, which is cool because a lot of times it's kind of job where you get a little bit more senior. Now you're behind a desk. Yeah, and that's cool for a lot of people or whatnot. But I wasn't married, I didn't have any children. I'm like, I wanted to keep going.
Yeah,
so it worked out perfect for me.
Yeah, when I deployed to Iraq, I let my platoon go, and I was brought into the staff, and I was a battle captain in southern Baghdad. So it was called the Triangle of Death at the time, and my job as a battle captain was to help control all the operational units outside the wire, and also be the guy who's requesting for aviation assets. And so I would get on the the radio and communicate directly with pilots, whether it's fixed or helos or whatever, and call in the reinforcements or call in the backup. And I always have been so grateful for the aviation crews who were so well disciplined that they came to our aid so many different times. The enemy, seeing ground troops or even tanks come up, they learned to deal with it. But when aviation came overhead, that changed the battlefield, and they would run and they would leave. I have many buddies who were warrant pilots on the helo side and Apaches, etc. And they saw the war from a different perspective than even I saw. I eventually crossed over in the Army and went infantry and then went into civil affairs. But they saw things with their magnified lenses and cameras that we never saw until we got really up close after the battle was done. But those guys saw things pretty close.
Yeah, speaking of which, I meant to say this earlier. I worked with quite a few Army chief, obviously you guys call it warrant officers chiefs, term of endearment, because I would get around them when he called me the same thing. It was funny because being in the Marines, if you call me chief, I immediately think of somebody in the Navy. But it was funny because I just love working with other services. And hey, big shout out to Task Force 160 at the Night Stalkers. I got to work with them a little bit on that same view.
Yeah, cool guys.
Yeah, but the warrant officers that fly, the Army has so many. I don't know if this is true. People said the Army technically has more airplanes than the Air Force because of all the helicopters and then whatever, which is probably true. But and so you have obviously flying warrant officers or whatnot. But I remember just being around a few of those guys that were, they're super professional and they're just like, they love to fly. and whether they're a Black Hawk guy, a 47 guy, or an Apache dude. But yeah, I always really liked working with Army Air because they do what they do very well, so it was cool.
Yeah. So in all of your deployments, did you end up facing danger at higher risk based on what you were doing?
Yeah. So, and I certainly don't want to church this up too much because we both have friends that shoot a lot more dirt than us.
Yeah.
But I definitely have the T-shirt. What I mean by that is, so the first time that I actually got got shot at or whatnot was just when I was on an admin deployment in Al-Assad, which is in the middle of Iraq for, most people know, where most of the action was obviously in the middle towards Baghdad or whatnot. We're in Al-Assad inside that Sunni triangle you're talking about, not too far away from Mahdi or TQ.
Yep.
But that was just, indiscriminate IDF because, they were still able to set up outside the base with, I think it was like old Russian 120 millimeter mortars or whatnot, or rockets. But they would shoot it, obviously, and they would just, so if you just happen to be in the area that, it's unlucky day. And then that same deployment, I went down to Al Taqatum and or TQ and a little bit closer to the action and whatnot. And I was walking back from the Chow one day, and they started getting mortared. So it was interesting because you just get flat or whatnot. And I don't want to make this. They weren't like super close or whatnot, but I could see them impact, blow up, and explode. And I was like, and it was almost like a movie. But nothing. So, but that was because I was an aviation guy at the time, and unless you're flying, you're not going to see it. So that was as close as I got to that. Transition to be a warrant officer, did, another, so in terms of being in danger, I was not walking point like my buddies down in Fallujah or kicking doors, never did that. But it really, other than some indiscriminate events, maybe right on a convoy or whatever else, being close to some stuff, things didn't get like real in terms of real danger until I started flying. And I would like to say this too, is like, just training flying is, arguably sometimes even more dangerous than combat flying because it's just because. So, and I say this jokingly, but it's like as an air crew, you try to kill yourself like once a week, just someone's mistake or you get close or whatnot. So when I first started flying, I was already, like I said, I was in my late 30s. So just getting through air crew swim club, I had to train for that. Because you literally, you've got all your gear on, you have to tread water for a bunch. They don't make it easy, and because they want you to be able to get out of the airplane, obviously. And then also, it was cool because the people in my squadron were receptive to me flying, but also I had a lot of senior guys that though they were the Osprey program, and they had already been flying in there, after the war, and CH-46s and a bunch of CASEVACs. They were legitimate combat air crew, been hit all that stuff. So when I started flying, I had a conversation with like the flight line chief or whatever else. I'm like, hey, Gunny, I don't expect any, because it's one of those situations where you're an officer. Nobody was going to give me anything, but also I wanted them to understand that, hey, when I walk out to the airplane and I'm on the airplane with you, I'm working for you. And it was cool because nobody ever, even when they were like, hey, grab that, or like when they had to be aggressive, it was like we had a very, very professional relationship.
That's awesome.
And we got off the airplane and went back to being like, hey, but I really appreciate, that was 266, the Fighting Griffins, but I really appreciate those guys. And then after I got winged and I had experience and a reputation, by the time that I got to West Coast, it was, I was just one of the flyers.
Yeah.
But the missions that we flew in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria they're legit. It's like that was when I started feeling it. But other than getting nervous every once in a while, I didn't think about it too much, because you can get geeked out. Like, yep. For example, and this was one of the first missions that we flew on my last deployment. We were down in Kuwait. We were starting to establish the base back up in Iraq after we'd given it away for a bunch of years. And then it was when all the special forces guys were already running around in Western Iraq into Syria. So we started flying missions up there, and we were just doing a milk run up to Baghdad International Airport.
Yeah. Was that 2010 or 11 or what was it?
That was 2014.
14. Okay.
Yeah, because for everybody's seen this, knows this. We were in Iraq, but we never really give up the bases. You just like leave a couple civilians there. So the place called El Jabber, which people are familiar with or whatnot, we actually went back to that one, turned the lights back on and whatnot. So it's the first time I'd ever established a forward thing or whatnot. When it was very interesting. And when we flew back to Al-Assad, which I had spent a bunch of time at before, and it was like a post-apocalyptic movie, man. It was like, what the? So anyway, we're flying up there one day, and our airplane started having a problem with one of the gearboxes. The Osprey, despite what people say, super resilient airplane, triple redundancy. That thing saved my life a few times. I've watched pilots try to kill us in that airplane, and the airplane say no. So it's a great bird, but there's certain things that happen that So fortunately, with a proper gearbox, that's the one thing that if that catastrophically fails, there's no backup for it. Unfortunately, we started having an issue, so we turned back around, and by the time we were still probably about 45 minutes away from our base down in Kuwait. We were in bad guy country. Plus, we're flying at 10,000 feet, and you add the fact that there was 3 guys and 1 female on the airplane. One of the pilots was a female, and then the other pilot, and then me and the other crew chief. And they had this is when those guys were already catching people and putting them in cages and burning them and all the other stuff. So we really had the conversation of like, hey, if we have to ditch this airplane, first of all, we're at 10,000 feet, proper gearbox fails, one stops spinning, you probably ain't gonna make it. But let's just assume we got to ditch. So that was the first time. I mean, you think about it, whatever else, but it's like that was the first time I ever thought about, wow, we're probably not going to make this. And it was an elongated thought. I mean, we were up in the airplane for a while. And then also, man, when we hit the ground, we're going to have to fight this out. And then would you want us to, are we going to let these people take us alive?
Yeah.
I've never really thought about this. Maybe people think about that joking or whatnot, but that was the first time. So I remember very specifically, because you get scared. I remember getting scared to the point where I had to recover first. I didn't freak out or anything, but I remember going, okay, this is happening, had to swallow a few times. And then, you recover because, whatever. But I just remember the physiological effect and then also what I was thinking about. But that was probably, that's probably one that, and I'm going to call that the worst. I mean, because in all the, 300-400 hours on the airplane or whatnot and a bunch of training, all of us have crazy stories about the time that we almost hit each other or whatever else. And none of that matters because, that's just part of training. But that flight, and then, maybe, we break a lot of dust coming in. So trying to do an insert in a level 5 or a level 5 RVL, reduced visibility landing, and having to punch down because you have to put people in. Those are a little sketchy from time to time. But once again, you trust the training, the airplanes, the airplanes helping you, all that other stuff. But those are the times that, where I guess for the most, I don't have any Black Hawk Down stories, which I'm glad.
Yeah.
And then it is when you talk to other veterans, especially combat veterans, we don't sit around and share stories, so to speak, but sometimes we talk and as you know. So in terms of my experiences, I think I'm about middle of the road in terms of flying. I definitely saw it. It affected me and whatnot, but not adversely. And I know people that have dealt with much worse.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I would feel about it.
Yeah, and on this channel, a guy I interviewed the other day said it best. He said, trauma is trauma is trauma. And for different people going through different things, it can look different. To one person, it can be really extreme, another person, it's less, but it still can be traumatic in our minds. You know, the longer we have that fight or flight response, a heightened sense of security, and on most deployments, it's always almost dialed in 100%. It ends up breaking, and our ability to regulate our own emotions changes. We always stay in this heightened sense, which means light, sound, whatever. Someone flips me off on the road and I want to, I think of him as an enemy in Iraq. Like, it's just like not sensible, but that's what happens when that trigger breaks. Did you feel like you had any longer term mental health struggles as a result of some of the things that you did?
Maybe not so much. I thought about I'm stumbling a little bit. What you just said a second ago was very interesting. But in terms of what happened to me in the Marine Corps, did it affect me? Yes. Am I better for it? Yes. Meaning that, like, how to put this? I was not that well adjusted growing up to begin with. Like, I look back or whatever. I wasn't like ADHD or whatever else, but I think I was an undisciplined kid, definitely, for sure. Right. And I was also restless and this type of stuff. And so so it's one of the reasons I joined the Marine Corps right at, I was 18 years old and but so I think that I've always been a little on the struggle in terms of just, settling myself down behavior. Cause I remember, especially as I got older or whatnot, when I got away from drinking, I'm like, man, I want to figure out why I'm a little disgruntled a little bit more than I should be. Because anybody that's known me over the years is like, I'm not really that much more disgruntled than I was before. And I don't want to say that I was walking around disgruntled. I definitely felt some things over the last few years. One of the reasons I did the ayahuasca or whatnot. But once again, after going through a PTSD clinic back in 2020, which was great, talking to the VA, contrary to what a lot of people say, they definitely have some quality people working there, and get to talk to a psychologist for 4 months on a weekly basis, and through a program where you have to do work and like really, so that was great. And we also determined that, I definitely don't, this may be an unpopular opinion, and I would never try to speak for other veterans. I'll speak for myself. I think that PTSD is a bit easy to put on us, only because it's like, well, you're doing all these things that somebody who has, that type of trauma is going to do, probably most likely to combat. Well, maybe it affects to it, but I was also, whether or not I was a firefighter or even just not a Marine or whatnot, I think I would have run into the same struggles that I did later in life. Maybe not as soon, because like you said, triggers, when you've been in those environments, man, it heightens you really quickly. So the extremeness, maybe I wouldn't have seen things earlier on, but so what I'm trying to say is this. I definitely think flying geeked me out a little bit, because I remember from those missions when I got out, I never had a problem flying as a civilian. But when I got out for the first couple of years, because I'm used to being on comms, and as an aircraft mechanic, I know what's happening with the airplane. We're on takeoff, rotation, flaps coming up, gears coming up. So if I hear a harmonic, that's a little weird, or why are the flaps still down, or why is the gear not, like that kind of stuff. And then also not being on comms, like I had physiological effects. I was definitely getting nervous. I never had sweaty palms in my entire life for the first year and a half, it was like that. So, and it never got to the point where I thought I needed to be medicated or whatnot. I just wasn't used to that level of nervousness in aviation, because I'm like, but that dissipated. And then, but I will say this, as I got out, because I'm essentially 10 years ago is when I got out.
Yep.
For the first 4 or 5 years, I think I was so busy doing other stuff. I was working in a nonprofit, the Wingman Foundation. I was working with the Osprey program. I was doing a bunch of stuff. I was training, not jiu-jitsu yet, but I was, really busy. And I wouldn't say like avoiding issues or whatnot, and I thought it was good. I'm like, yeah, I just did a great, successful career. This is where that whole arrogance and confidence thing will really, bust you up a little bit. I'm like, hey, I'm doing great, making a lot of money. I was on paper, and I was happy, I guess. So, but anyway, I definitely got to a point where I talked this on a podcast a couple of years ago with my buddy Paul, where I used to be able to do math in my head. I couldn't do it anymore. Like I thought it was happening earlier because I've stammered a few times on this, but it's all those memories flying back. So I got to be ready for that next time. But it's like I would get to the point where I was like, I would lose words, and I was never like that. I've always spoke a little quick, which I've tried to dial down, but it's because my mind's moving so quickly, which helped me a lot in my other jobs, or whatnot. But it got to a point where all of that was essentially just running off the rails. And I was definitely getting a little bit meaner. I wasn't physical or anything like that, but I was, And so I don't attribute, I think, yes, my Marine Corps experience has something to do with that. I don't necessarily have a lot of repressed stuff from my childhood, because I think anybody that's been through therapy, you address that, you either accept it or you don't. So I was able to, like, not that I didn't have a crazy bad childhood or anything, but it's like all of the issues from before that might have been driving like what I was ultimately, I thought I'd already addressed. And once again, when I went through my first ayahuasca experience, and especially the second one, realized that maybe not to the fullest that I thought, but also once it gave me a different perspective, I was able to. So I don't want to jump forward, but so to answer your question, I'll give you an example. I have a really good friend of mine. His name is Mike Miller. We actually went to the same high school, didn't know each other because we were doing that on-track thing. We met each other for the first time at the Staff Sergeant course in the Marine Corps, then saw each other again at gunning. He is the epitome of a Marine Corps grunt. He became a sergeant major and then ended up retiring at the 2-star level as a senior enlisted advisor. Yeah, he's amazing. Both schools, the Staff Sergeant School and the Gunning School, he was voted the honor man. Yeah. Both. Yeah. I'm talking 3 years apart. Yeah. Mike is a phenomenal individual. That dude has a lot of combat experience, all the way up from sergeant all the way through. He's out there. He ended up deploying with a combat unit as a sergeant major. So and I remember him talking to him. And once again, we don't like trade stories or whatnot, but I remember, and I don't want to talk out of turn or anything, but he said something along the lines of talking about how, when grunts are engaged, people die, that type of stuff. And I'm not going to get like very specific about what he said, but it was just like the way that he was able to handle it. Like he processed it in such a way that I'm not saying that he's not affected by it or whatnot. And we're talking about the same guy, they're taking wounded. Like he's got the stories of the kids getting hurt and all that other stuff, but his ability to process that, I've always like taken strength from, because we all are different and trauma affects all of us different. But in terms of trauma, he's definitely seen it. The way he carries himself. We talk. We usually, nowadays, it's usually like over Christmas, and get a Christmas card from or whatever else, we'll text a little bit. But I look at people like him and I'm like, man, if somebody like that can not just hold it together, but like carries it like that, then the issues that I was having, because forgive me for the veterans saying this, it's easy to be like, hey, thank me for my service. I have PTSD, 10 deployments, give me my 10% discount. I'm saying that kind of tongue in cheek. Sure. But it's because also maybe you struggle a lot and you're like, man, I don't want to say it's an excuse, but you have to have a reason for being screwed up. I almost got to the point where I was like, I'm gonna buy off on the fact that I have too much PTSD. Almost. But fortunately, I never, not fortunately, because I'm joking when I say this, but mental health and that type of stuff that affects both, very, very serious. But you can appreciate this being a combat veteran. Gallows humor is a thing. It is. So for anybody that's struggling for this for real, that's like, seriously has to worry about having loaded weapons around them, my heart goes out to them. And then there's people like me that maybe weren't that well adjusted, came in the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps did great things for them. Maybe it was a little aggressive at the end, maybe got a little scared or whatnot, but then it's incumbent upon me, because I am still in one piece and I'm a mature adult, to like put it together. So for me personally, it's a responsibility thing more than anything else. So I know, very long-winded answer to your short question, but it's like, no, but it makes sense, Ricky. It makes sense, because I just interviewed a guy the other day who takes people on retreats for psilocybin and ayahuasca down in Mexico, and it was a great conversation with him. But one of the things that really caught my attention from his Instagram post where I reached out to him was he made a comment like, I work with a lot of veterans, and there can be two guys who are on the same deployment, experience the same trauma. One guy turns to alcohol, gets suicidal, the other guy lives a happy, normal life. And he says, so it wasn't that combat trauma that was the catalyst for the mental health breakdown. It ended up being
he went back in time and he saw that he had never self-regulated his emotions previously growing up. And as a result, when that moment hit, he was unprepared for it, whereas the other guy had already had experiences where he had learned how to have resiliency, etc., and he ended up faring better. Yeah. I agree with that.
Well, I think that goes back to the whole nature versus nurture environment. I think the way people are about it, and I love my mom. Unfortunately, she passed away a few years of cancer. But my point is, I had a good childhood or whatever else. It's just, I think that if I know this now and this isn't a sign blame to anybody. If I was programmed because of my skill sets now and how aggressive I am, and once I learned how to be a world champion, I'm like, oh man, if I'd have known this like 30 years ago, it's good. Whatever. If I would have been programmed a little bit differently, I would have. I mean, I'm fine with my life. I don't want a different life or whatnot. I just would have had I would have had different reactions, and I would have felt differently throughout the years.
Yeah.
And I don't regret that, or because I feel better now, but I just understand it now.
Yep. So talk me forward here, Ricky. Talk me through this ayahuasca experience that you've had.
Oh yeah. So I had to figure out what ayahuasca was to begin with, because you hear all kinds of different stuff, DMT, ibogaine, whatever. So we're talking about plant-based medicine. Long story short, so ayahuasca obviously comes from a plant, and it's a Schedule I narcotic. And the reason that's the reason that's how they control it or whatnot. So you have Indians that come from like Colombia and Brazil, depending on whatever else, and that's how they come. So it's totally legal. They keep it with them, and it's just a liquid form. It's kind of a viscous, almost liquid. So I will say this about ayahuasca: the ceremony is as important as the medicine. It's not one of those where you have to like almost get hypnosis, like you have to believe it's happening. If you take ayahuasca, you will know you've taken it. But what I totally appreciated was just, it's very serious. It's a couple thousand years old type plant medicine, and they bring all that stuff with them. So the Indians, they're up. You take it at night. You probably take your first dose 9 o'clock, and then you might take, say, 2 or 3 cups, depending on that's all different strength wise or whatnot, but the different places. So, but they're up all night with you, chanting, singing, and whatever else. And you don't, it's not a stimulant, so to speak, but you don't sleep really. You just go, like when I take it, I never wanted to do hallucinogens recreationally, because one, I'm kind of an addictive personality. I might like it. Plus, I wanted to explore. So, fortunately, the only time that I've taken, the mushrooms, and I don't have crazy hallucinations. Like, I don't see things that aren't there. I know that I'm tripping, so to speak. So, ayahuasca was the same experience for me. So I was present the whole time. Different people, they can go different places or whatnot. But it essentially, the best way to describe it is, you are awake, but you're watching a movie of your life throughout the night. And the cool part about it is you're able to visit, especially talking to other ayahuasca people, that maybe a few veterans, people that have dealt with some real trauma. They were able to visit those places and almost be like wrapped in bubble wrap. Whereas what lady I spoke to the last trip I went on, I've done 2, the last one I just got back from, she was saying how, like, she had tried to do these things through a therapist or whatnot, but it was very, very severe trauma. I'll leave it at that. But she just was like, it's hard for her to go there. But with ayahuasca, she's able to, the ayahuasca just takes her there, like holds her hand as they're walking through, and she's able to, I don't want to say relive it, but deal with it, process it, and be a better person for it. So it's like, it is a very protective medicine. And then I'll end with this, because the people I've spoken to, especially like people my age, they'll say things like, I'm afraid to take it because I'm afraid of the results. And I would never try to talk somebody into it. I would just tell people that if they're ready for it, then do it. There's nothing unsafe about it. If you went in there and you were probably maybe on a lot of psych meds or whatever else, you could have a negative reaction. They talk about that.
Yeah.
But if you're like a normal person, it's not like, and I've never taken LSD or acid, but it's not like you're taking some chemical that may like burn your head out. So I will tell people that it's as safe as people. It is definitely safe, and if someone's ready for it, I would encourage them to look into it or whatnot. Yeah. It changed my life, man. I'm not kidding you. Or I don't want to say it like that. My life was already changing because of a lot of things, meaning I've been on this warrior monk journey or whatnot, but I have a significantly better understanding of what's going on because of ayahuasca. And that's the best way to say it.
And I've heard this same experience from several other veterans, first responders, and other people who've gone through trauma who have taken that plant medicine journey. And so I'm in the process of starting the planning to do my first journey.
Oh wow, good for you, man.
I've done a lot of processing, going through, and we talked like PTSD. PTSD for me resembled deep depression, high anxiety, withdrawal from people, isolation. And it's hard to mix that with what I experienced in an explosion in Iraq with a TBI. Those are shared symptoms. But I know that in all the work that I've done in therapy, there are still some things that are left unopened. And I really want to work through it because I'm a family man. I'm a religious individual. I want to be the best that I can be with all the time I have left. And if that means I need to do some more work and do it with some plant-based stuff, then I'm all game.
That's exactly what I couldn't have expressed it better from a sentiment wise. I'm not going to say I wasn't a dirtbag or anything, but like I was just like there was times in my life I was just way too aggressive. I made decisions that were very, very selfish based. You know, I lived kind of like a single guy's life for a long time without, you know, and in your own mind, I wasn't out there torturing people or anything, but it's like you look back and you're like, man, I could have. So one of the things that I recognized when I did my first ayahuasca experiences, I was able to start separating, well, the confidence and arrogance thing really the last couple of years or whatnot, especially once I started being very competitive and winning. Winning a world championship is the most humbling experience that's ever happened to me. And I didn't think it was gonna. I wasn't not gonna be humble, especially with all the like all of us masters people get along. We see each other tournaments. We're absolutely trying to choke each other unconscious. But as soon as it's over, it's like, you know. So I guess my point is I was able to, ultimately separate confidence from arrogance when I won that. I was on my way, say like I was 95% there because of ayahuasca, and then when I won that, stood up there on that podium. And I don't want to make a big deal out of it more than it is. That's my Olympics. I was trying to push for it or whatnot. But it was euphoric because I was like, man, I feel so good, but I don't feel like, look at me. Like I don't feel like it's having grace, you know, those types of things. And though I consider myself a relatively good person before and definitely good in a lot of, you know, dynamic situations, that whole grace thing and whatever else, I think I was missing the boat on that a bit. So, but I guess my point is like, you know, it's the ayahuasca really pumped empathy into me. It really showed me some things that I was deficient on without punching you in the face. Because I've done Ibogaine before as well. I did it about 2 months before I did my first ayahuasca experience. I was listening to Sean Ryan podcast like everybody else, and he goes, I went down to Mexico, and I live right next to, I live in San Diego, right next to Tijuana. So I'm down in Mexico like every couple of weeks anyway. So I'm like, I'm going to go down there. And so this is funny. I didn't really realize, I mean, I kind of knew what Ibogaine was, but I didn't realize that essentially it's a rehab clinic you go to. And I had a fantastic experience because I ended up talking to some people that were down there for very specific rehab purposes. And this guy was great because he was, and the reason I share this story is because he was so open about it. He was, you know, a very, very lifelong drug user, but full high-end musician, had videos and all that stuff, but really lived that lifestyle and was struggling, but was cool because I'd never met somebody like that. He'd never really talked to somebody like me. So we had this really good conversation. And he was telling me about I was, you know, Skid Row, like just wild stuff. But anyway, so I do the Ibogaine experience. And what they say is this: Ibogaine is dad and ayahuasca is mom. And I can attest to that because Ibogaine is it's a steamroller, man. You're down for like 8 hours and you're just along for the ride. Wasn't a bad experience. But there's a reason they have to check you. Like, that's the one where they have to monitor your heart and all that stuff because it stresses your system. I had a good experience from it. I didn't, and I had never, I'm going to go and say it, I never spent time in a rehab clinic before, so that was kind of fun.
Good.
I mean, because it was a nice house and whatever, and you get a massage, there's a steam room. We did also part of the treatment, 5-day treatment. We did DMT, the 5-MeO, which is the actual frog itself, which... never smoked crack, but you see it, right? But it's essentially looks the same thing because it's like a glass pipe and they have the canisters because that's where the frog stuff is. And that one was pretty intense because it comes on you very quickly. I imagine like crack does, because you basically take a shot every like 10 minutes, and it's like an ayahuasca experience, but compressed into 30 minutes. So my point of all that is, I'm glad that I did the Ibogaine first, because you typically only do Ibogaine once. I wanted to check out DMT because you'd heard, just once again. None of this was recreational for me. But I wanted to experience something that wasn't just going to be just like a mood altering thing, like almost like mushrooms.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, mushrooms are great, especially if you use a guide for it. But so I went through that, and then took about 6 weeks of just let it process or whatnot, because I wanted to see what the difference was. And there was certainly differences. It was the first time that I realized that it was the first time I realized or started to understand how to separate confidence and arrogance. And I also realized that one of the reasons that I was inherently selfish, which I did not like about myself, was I just didn't have a lot of empathy, because I don't know, something happened. So I started filling my empathy bucket back up, which affected everything.
Yeah.
And then about 2 months later, I did my first ayahuasca experience, which was in, I think, latter part of October. And then I just did my second ayahuasca experience about 2 weeks ago. Well, right before Christmas. And then my sister and I, she lives in Oregon. She's going to come down here. Her and her husband, they're moving back down to Southern California. But I'm going to take her to the same place in March, and she's going to go through it with me as well. So I'm a huge proponent of it. It sounds like I'm like making it a big raves experience. It's not. But I will say this, and brother, I can't wait for you to go through it, because it's usually 2 nights, 2.5 days. The entire ceremony is as important as everything else that you're doing, and you're really you'll enjoy it, man. So end of rant. Do ayahuasca.
Yeah. What about psilocybin, or whatever that term is?
Psilocybin. So essentially, like, obviously the mushrooms you take for hallucinogens. So I started using mushrooms, or like taking mushrooms, where you want to look at it, a couple years ago. I'd never had access to them, and I'd never really thought about it too much, because when I left the Marine Corps, I quit drinking completely, because I knew that I didn't want to be a statistic. It's really easy to do it, whatever else. And then,
good for you.
Marijuana was legal in California, started smoking it. So did that for a couple, 3 years, but then, it gets to a point where it's like, well, first of all, you cannot use marijuana to replace alcohol, because if you're looking for those feelings alcohol gives you, it's not the same. And then it's got to a point where it was just like, the effect of weed just wasn't like the work effect. Didn't really that much for me. I will say this though, because I've really got to a point where essentially, especially after Ibogaine, I didn't want to do anything, but I'd really backed off on smoking weed just because the feeling didn't do much for me. Plus I was active and whatnot. But I will say this, because I don't have arthritis or anything, but the anti-inflammatory, characteristics of both CBD and THC are real. For example, I was doing like 90-minute, like, especially with ghee, where you're grabbing.
Hey, Ricky, just hold just a second. I'll be right back. Let me shut my door. Come on. Out.
Good.
I got kids coming home from school, so go ahead.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, so long story short, if I was to, say smoke a joint or smoke some weed after that, I could definitely feel it. So that's kind of the only thing I miss. But if I really got sore, I could just take some CBD. But I guess my point of all that was I didn't. Well, I wasn't looking for any kind of mood altering stuff, but then, when 2020 started hanging around, just like, fuck, because once I went through that PTSD clinic, stopped working for a while, started training, just was, I don't want to make it seem like I was in a hole. I definitely wasn't. It was like, my fiance and I were, I was fine when it came to that. I was just starting to like slip, but I knew it. And fortunately for myself, I built such a good life in terms of a financial buffer and all that stuff, whereas I could go through these like, problems or issues I'm having and not really like the outside world wasn't going to bug me too much. But yeah, it was, I was looking for something, but I didn't want to start drinking again. Kind of done with weed. I didn't want to go down the recreational drug route, because once you go down that route, especially if you're an aggressive, addictive person, who knows where it goes.
Yep.
Wasn't interested.
Yep.
Then found somebody that was had access to mushrooms, and I started taking them. And then microdose them for a while. And then, I mean, obviously we take the cocktail dose. So I took enough of them to feel like, or whatever. But after about a year of taking them, like off and on or whatnot, I almost didn't feel the effects of it so much. So I got off them for say 6 months, and then had a wild hair. I'm like, okay, I'll start microdosing again to see if there's a difference. And I think mushrooms work well for people, but I think also they might run their course. So I think whatever they were going to do for me, they did. Because I certainly didn't change as much as, or certainly wasn't affected as much as ayahuasca affected me from mushrooms. But I remember thinking, like, probably a little deeper thoughts. And also, I will say this: mushrooms, if I didn't take mushrooms and then go roll, I wouldn't be tripping and trying to train my partners or whatnot.
Right.
But like, I would, like, my ability to flow and like slow down and be a little bit more thinking or whatnot was affected positively by mushrooms. And then I think I just got to a certain point where I just wasn't that interested in them anymore. Now, I will say this: going to the ayahuasca retreats, there's a bunch, people there that in the community that do the mushrooms, but they do it with a guide. And one of them was saying, hey, you should. And so I'm going to actually go through, they're local. It's a 1-day thing. You show up there for like 4 or 5 hours. They take you through it. So I'd like to do that because like I said, again, the ceremony, I keep thinking about my first ayahuasca experience. The ceremony was probably more important than the medicine that time. So I'm really interested to see the mushroom delivery system in a ceremony setting with a guide or whatnot. So I'm going to definitely try that again. Other than that, from either, like a recreational use, I think they've ran their course with me. Yeah.
Good. So in the last little bit here, can you talk about what jiu-jitsu has done for you mentally, physically?
Oh, wow. Yes. I could talk about this for hours, but I will be succinct. First of all, jiu-jitsu is going to expose every single weakness that you have physically and mentally, without a doubt. I think that's probably one of the reasons that, one of the reasons that people probably don't continue with it after, say, like the first 3 or 4 months. People, they say, get the blue belt blues or whatnot. But I mean, usually that's just because Jesus takes maybe 3 years to get a blue belt. You train enough, like, you got a girlfriend because you're cool now. That's why people quit. I mean, not quit, but they're like, hey. But I think people have the first 3 or 4 months, especially if you're a guy and you're, say, ex-military guy who maybe got some scrap. Like, my point being is if you either know how to fight on the ground or you do not. Yeah. And there's no accidental submissions so it's not like a punch. Yeah. So I guess my point is it absolutely exposed every single weakness that I didn't know I had, and it was alerting. So my point is from that I have completely changed how I train physically, strength conditioning. With the guys over at Electrum Performance, Alex Turner and those guys. Started working with a mental performance coach 2022. Yeah, after I lost my second PANS and was like, I'm done with this, because I started realizing it really is all mental. So my point is I just did my 5-year anniversary. I started training officially, because I'd been trained on and off over the years, but never got bit by the bug. But I started training in essentially January 2020, right before COVID kicked. And I got some really good advice from one of the black belts I knew, Eric Flores, former Marine as well. He trains in all kinds of disciplines. He competes in Muay Thai. Like, he's did a Taekwondo tournament last weekend. And I mean, I don't want to say it's cheesy or whatnot, but you're talking also a guy that's competed at like in the No-Gi World Championships. So he's always doing something. But he goes, I wish I would have competed more as a white belt. So I'm like, that's great advice. So 6 weeks later, got in my first tournament. It was great. My first match was a small mixed tournament or whatnot. They just threw everybody together. No kidding. My first match as a 6-week white belt was against a black belt, a guy named Justin, still down in Texas. It was funny. He obviously lost that match. He took it easy on me, so it could have smashed me. But it was one of those. The tournaments have gotten different and whatnot. They do it better with that. But it's a smaller tournament, Grappling Industries. It was like an all belts open. I'm like, sure, I'll do that. Anyway, so it was cool. So I guess by point of that 5-year anniversary, I've learned quite a bit about myself. But also, it's like you learn how to train. Everybody gets something different from jiu-jitsu, and their journeys are different. For me, here's what I learned. I learned how to train because they really didn't know how to train well before, which takes time. I learned how to deal with adversity in terms of like, no matter what I do, this guy's going to kick my ass. Like I don't get mad at my training partners, but you'll get annoyed with them because you'll have ones that are just always a little bit better than you, and they're not messing with you, but their job is to smash you in that round.
Yeah.
So it's like, so you really have to problem solve and all that other stuff. And then the consistency that one needs to have if you want to progress in jiu-jitsu and compete at the same time, especially if you're a little bit, well, a master's athlete. I just turned 53. You have to take care of yourself. You have to get recovered with that. So I've learned quite a bit about how to like be a decent performance athlete. And it culminated into, so the biggest organization, I guess, in the world would be the International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation. So the IBJJF. So that's my Olympics. So the Nogi World Championship that I just won is essentially my Olympics. And the Nogi Pan Championship, which right before that is like the second one. So I was able to hit both those this year. So that's cool. And then in 2 weeks, there's this other organization, all the grapplers will know, ADCC. So if I'm successful in that one, I will have triple crowned this. So it'll be exciting. I'm calling my shot, but if I don't, no, I'm just kidding. No, we're going to go out and fight anyway. But
where is it?
It's here in San Diego. It's a ADC San Diego Open. The ADCC, which, like I said, all the grapplers know, is it's not so much an up-and-comer. It's now the premier no-gi organization in the world, whereas the IBJJF has been around for a long time. It's like, if you say you're a jiu-jitsu world champion, you're essentially saying, I'm an IBJJF world champion. It's kind of like, I would compare the UFC to the IBJJF. I'm not a UFC fighter. I'm not saying that I am. But in terms of, like, what it is, and then the ADCC is like, that's a big deal. That's a big deal title as well. So yeah. I'm going to try.
Yeah, good for you, man.
Yeah, and I will say this, from a mental health standpoint, training in general will help anybody. I think running all the things that will reduce your brain, all that stuff. I accidentally ran the Marine Corps Marathon in 2017. I'll never do that again. I trained for it. It was horrible. I don't recommend it for anybody. I built to stand and fight, not run.
Yeah.
But I remember being out there on some of those like 12, 13-mile runs. And yeah, you get a little euphoric and bored. But I guess so any kind of fitness will help. But jiu-jitsu because no matter, here's what I know about jiu-jitsu. Because it's happened where you're just frustrated or you're strained, and I will say this: competition created a decent amount of anxiety in me that I didn't really know I had. So I had to overcome that. That's why I started dealing with mental performance coach or whatnot. So it's the mental health aspect of jiu-jitsu comparatively to a lot of other things is probably just a little bit better, because here's the deal: you can go real hard, super hard, and not get hurt. You can go in there, and especially if somebody's a little bit bigger or better than you, they'll just sit back and play guard and let you go ham, so like you can train, and they're playing their defenses. So, whereas in a boxing gym, anytime you're striking or whatnot, it's hard to go hard without hurting somebody.
Yep.
See, the point is, you can get into a jiu-jitsu mat and take your aggressions out, not on your partner, especially if they're better than you, because they'll beat your ass. But you can get because it's just the mat is your safe space, it's your happy place. I have, at this point, listened to a lot of belt promotion speeches, right? And especially the higher belts, the brown and the black belts or whatnot, like they almost always will talk about the space that they're in or whatnot. So the cool thing about jiu-jitsu is you can be totally stressed or mad because you just got tapped out, or it doesn't make a difference because you carry that stuff around.
Yeah.
But as soon as you get in there, and then whoever starts the class, you start drilling with your buddy or whatnot, you're not, even if you want to be thinking about that type of stuff, you can't be, because you're. So I think that jiu-jitsu is great, and it's obviously a great thing to learn in terms of martial art or combative or whatnot. But from a mental health aspect, I don't know anything that's too much better. There's probably things that are as good, but I don't know one that's better.
Yeah.
I would recommend it to anybody.
Dr. Brian challenged me, and he said, hey, I want you to get back into it, because I did some in the military and the Army, right? They walked us through combatives and got to certain levels, and loved to fight. Went to Ranger School, and we did a ton of it. Actually ended up meeting Matt Hughes, who from the UFC.
Oh, wow.
He came to he came to it after he had just won this huge fight, and it was really cool to see him. I loved it. I loved the competition. I loved fighting littler guys than me and getting wrapped up and being like, what just happened? I love that because everybody thinks bigger guy always wins, and that's just not true.
That's very true.
But I ended up tearing the meniscus in my right knee when I entered a gym, and I was at it for about 2 months. Fought these 2 younger guys, 20-year-old kids, and they were bigger than me, but we weighed the same, and ended up winning, but just about died. And I was like, what is wrong with my knee? And I just haven't gone back to it. Part of it too is that part of my injury is my shoulder. I had to have my shoulder replaced, so I can't do certain movements. And so, progressively getting more involved in it, especially if I were to try to compete, that's my Achilles.
No, I hear you.
So, yeah, I wish it was different. I wish I could do it because I loved it.
Yeah, I will say this also about jiu-jitsu, because, injuries aside, it's like it's still the type of thing that you can be guarded and careful, especially because obviously, say like you're already in training or whatnot and you catch an injury, there's things that you can do where you can still get in there and roll around and act.
True.
And that's and not that I'm saying, hey, get in there. No.
Hey, you can say it.
no, bro. I look at jiu-jitsu the same way I look at ayahuasca. I think it's great for everybody, but if somebody has a specific reason for not doing it, I totally respect. So I look at my life from my own perspective instead of trying to put my perspective on everybody else's, which is something I've learned later in life. But no, I think it's good for most people. But I also know that it's cool because it's a super protective thing. Not only is that safe space or whatever else, but you can go in there and be dinged up or whatever else. You just tell your partner, hey. Though this doesn't happen. I train at Atos headquarters, which is a pretty well-known school. We've got a lot of good people walking around. You go to some schools and it's like someone's like, yeah, my arm or whatever else hurts, and then you're like, and then you start like not going to that side, and then they're like 100% on you. You're like, bro, come on. So
yeah.
No, but I once again, 5-year anniversary was cool, but I'm glad that I'm on my journey. I'll eventually be a black belt, but I don't care about when that happens. I'm a purple belt right now. Like, none of that matters to me. What matters most now is I'm comfortable competing, because I wasn't before. Like, it really, I was using it scared me, like freak out. Like, but my coach down at Gracie said this a while ago. He's like, if you're not owning that 5 minutes before the match, you're going to get owned. Mm-hmm. And it's like so true. Now I'm 5 minutes before the match. I used to have to work to get locked in. Now it doesn't make a difference who's over. It's just this blur, and they walk out on the mat. Now they're just some blur that I'm going to take down. And I say that respectfully. I love all of my masters opponents. We're all friends. We all know each other on Instagram or whatnot. But we also know that all jiu-jitsu matches start as a wrestling match, so plan accordingly.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's great, Ricky. It's been so good to meet with you and get to hear your story. Thank you for your service, for your career. And thanks for the example you're setting today as what did you say you were, 53?
Yeah, I just turned 53.
Yeah, 53-year-old who's keeping his body and his mind in check, and still doing hard things. I talk about it all the time on this channel. There are several levers we can pull to get ourselves out of our own heads, and that one of them's fitness. And I love the fact that you're still setting that example. And it's great to meet you officially. And like I say to most of the people on this channel, I say, you ever need anything, brother, I'm there for you. I appreciate it. And it's good to get to know you. No, man,
I did everything you're saying. I'm really excited to hear about your ayahuasca experience once you have it.
Yeah, I'm going to document the whole thing. I want it to be known because I had a lot of questions. So the journey I'm going to take is going to be on this channel, and people will see it.
For sure. Cool, man. All right, well, hey, man, I appreciate everything, and thank you for the invite.
Yeah, brother. Let's stay in touch. If you're ever in Utah competing, let me know, and I'd love to come down to Salt Lake and see you.
Definitely, brother. Thank you.
All right, man. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, bye.